Okay, Montezuma and Cortez, Chapter 2, Part 2. All right, Montezuma, now anxious to be rid of these persistent visitors, sent word to the tribes round about the Spanish camps that all gifts and assistance of all kinds be at once discontinued. Accordingly, these tribes, some of whom had come and pitched their tents close about the Spanish camp, and had generously supplied them with all the fruit the country afforded, had cooked for them, worked for them, and served them in every way, silently folded their tents and stole away under cover of the darkness of the night. Now, indeed, the Spaniards began to experience the real discomfort of landing in an unknown land. The mosquitoes which had swarmed before now seemed to form in double and treble swarms. Their bites, poisonous and irritating, distracted many a brave soldier who would have faced unflinchingly the cannon's mouth. And the blazing heat of the sun by day and the steaming heat of the soil by night prostrated and sickened the men. Something must be done. Leave the country Cortez was determined he would not. Accordingly, a little band was sent out to explore the shore and find a place more favorable for camp than was this low, sickly spot. Just at this critical point, when his men were full of discontent and dissatisfaction, and were urging him to return to Cuba and report to the governor there what had been discovered, 5 natives came into camp. "We are recently conquered," said they, "by the Mexicans, and we like our new rule not at all. We will join you in a march against this king of theirs, and will fight with you." This was indeed joyful news. At once Cortez saw that by arousing rebellion among the different tribes he might conquer Montezuma. He treated these natives with great kindness and respect, sending them away loaded with beads of glass and bits of cloth, which were to them of untold value. Cortez was now in fine spirits. Help had indeed come, but now rebellion arose in his own camp. "It is time to go back to Cuba," muttered the men. "What is the use of staying here until we have the whole Mexican Empire down on our heads?" Calling his friends together in secret, he said to them, "Form yourselves against these discontented ones. Tell them that the reason the governor of Cuba gave us no orders to do anything more than find this country was that he intended himself to come here should we discover the way, to march into the city of which we have been told, and appropriate all the glory and all the rich gold to himself, while we, the discoverers, will remain as poor as ever." No one knew better than the greedy Cortez himself how to appeal to his greedy band of followers. His words had the desired effect, and finally, though not without much quarreling and grumbling, much threatening and bullying on the part of the men, and no little flattery and bribery on the part of Cortez, a conciliation was effected, and the Spaniards were again of one mind. At once preparations for a change of camp were made. The artillery was loaded into the vessels, and the men began their line of march across the country. Glad indeed were they to leave behind the burning sand hills amid which they had so long been imprisoned, and to find themselves in a rich, fertile country where fruit and game were abundant. As they passed on from village to village, the natives fled before them, fearful that the Spaniards were bent on death and destruction. In the temples of these deserted villages, Cortez found books made of paper, and, to their horror, human beings stretched upon the altars for living sacrifices to the gods. As the Spaniards neared the town of Cempoala, the natives came forth to greet them, their hands laden with sweet-scented flowers. Nothing can be prettier than an offering of flowers, but I am inclined to think that Cortez and his gold-greedy followers had little sentiment regarding these natives, and would have been far more pleased had they been offered 1/10 the amount in gold. One of these native tribes invited Cortez to their village, begging him to excuse the absence of the ruler, their cacique, they called him, for he was too fat and heavy to be moved about much. Cortez, anxious to see the manner of living in these Mexican cities, gladly accepted the opportunity to enter the city of Cempoalla. Some of the horsemen galloped ahead to catch a glimpse of the city. The finer houses were white and carefully polished, and the poorer houses were whitewashed, it being a law of the city that houses and streets shall always be white and clean. As the horsemen approached and saw this city all white and glistening in the clear sunlight, someone cried, "The city is built of silver! The city is built of silver!" And back they rushed to Cortez, shouting the wonderful news, "The city is built of silver! The city is built of silver!" Great excitement ran through the troops, who were only too ready to believe any wonderful story of this new country. But when the city was reached and the shining silver was found to be merely clean whitewash, a roar of laughter went up from the troops, and ever after the silver city was a standing joke among them. On reaching the city, the fat cacique, supported by 2 strong attendants, met them and courteously offered Cortez and his officers some of the finest buildings in the city for their occupancy. The men of the city were oddly dressed in wide sashes and were adorned with rings in their ears, their noses, and even in their lips. The women of the upper classes wore long robes of fine cotton reaching from their shoulders to the ground. The Spaniards were feasted with maize bread and the best of tropical fruits. The fat cacique and Cortez held a long interview, in which the former complained bitterly of the harshness of the great Montezuma, whose armies, so he said, were likely at any time to sweep down upon the city of Sempoalla and gather up all its treasures and carry off its youths and maidens for sacrifices. Cortez promised to aid them by and by, to throw off this tyranny, and on the following day moved his troops on, leaving the fat cacique in high spirits that at last a power had come that would overthrow the cruel Montezuma. As Cortez was setting forth, attended by hundreds of slaves, who, by the fat cacique's order, had been sent with the troops to carry their baggage, a procession of these very tax gatherers from Montezuma was met. Immediately, the watchful mind of Cortez saw here an opportunity to make his way and prove his power both to Montezuma and the tax-burdened natives. The natives, so it is said, turned pale at the sight of these tax-gatherers, and the fat cacique trembled like the great jellyfish that he was. "Arrest and imprison these Aztec tax-gatherers," said Cortez, when his advice and help were asked. "Arrest and imprison the messengers of the great Montezuma," gasped the cacique, clasping his fat hands in great fear. "Yes," said Cortez boldly, "let these people of Xiahincia do as I bid, and I will take care that they do not suffer for it." The natives went away more than ever impressed with the greatness of this Spanish leader. "Surely," said they, "this of itself is proof that he must be sent by the gods, for no one otherwise ordered would dare to thus defy the great Montezuma." This was exactly what Cortez wished them to think, knowing that with these ignorant, superstitious people, to be considered a messenger from the gods would be to receive from them most abject and profound reverence and submission. But now Montezuma was to be appeased. Montezuma was to be appeased. "Who are you, and whence do you come?" said Cortez to the prisoners with the greatest show of innocence. "We are Montezuma's officers," said they haughtily, "and we are imprisoned by these people who have been spurred on to this by you." "By me!" cried Cortez. "You are unjust. I knew nothing of it, I assure you. If I had, I should have used what little influence I might have to prevent so sad an occurrence as this. As proof of my sincerity, I will myself release you and send you secretly in my own vessels to your king." Of course, Cortez took great pains that the people should believe the officers had escaped, while, on the other hand, Montezuma would be made to feel that the Spanish chief had done him a very great kindness. The plan worked well. The people, frightened that the nobles had escaped to their king, knew only too well that to ask pardon of their king would be of no avail, and so swore eternal allegiance to Cortez, and the cacique placed himself and his people under Spanish protection. And now the escaped tax-gatherers had arrived in their city, bearing such a report of the kindness and courtesy of Cortez that Montezuma, easily influenced as he was, and truly desirous to be just even to these apparent enemies of his country, recalled an army that he had already sent out against them, and decided to wait a little before he made any move whatever. Wishing to appear in no wise unappreciative of Cortez's support of his royal authority, Montezuma at once dispatched messengers to the new Spanish camp with beautiful and costly gifts. These messengers Cortez received with his usual flattering speeches, feasted and entertained them handsomely, and took great care also that they should be duly impressed with the grandeur and power of his troops and artillery. The people, instead of seeing through the double dealing of Cortez, looked upon this friendly interview with more and more of awe. Surely these Spaniards must be from the gods themselves, else how could they terrify the great Montezuma? Surely they were possessed of some secret power of which Montezuma was well aware, and before which he bowed in submission. Finally, on the 16th of August, 1519, the Spaniards set out for the interior of this wonderful country, determined at any cost to see this great Montezuma. We will not here stop to describe the journey across the hot plains, up the gradual rise of country, which grew colder and colder at every mile, through the rough mountain passes, where they were assailed by fearful storms of rain and hail, till, at last, they reached the region of the tablelands. Beautiful and strange as the scenery was, it had little attraction for these sordid-minded Spaniards, who would have bowed before a nugget of gold far more readily than before the most marvelous scene of tropical beauty that nature could have spread before them. Arriving at last at the gates of a city, Cortez asked of the cacique, "Is this city subject to Montezuma?" "What city is there that is not subject to our noble king Montezuma?" answered the cacique coldly. "My city is not," answered Cortez shortly. "Neither am I. I come from a country whose king is the greatest in the world. His very servants are princes as great as Montezuma." "Montezuma has 30 vassals," boasted the cacique, "each one of whom has 30,000 men. Montezuma has wealth untold, and his city is in a lake, approachable only by long causeways, and these intersected by many drawbridges, guarded day and night by hundreds of sentinels." Before leaving this cacique, Cortez asked him for gold to send to the great king across the water. "I have gold enough," replied he, "but not one piece of it will I send to your king, lest it displease Montezuma. But should Montezuma ask it, then myself and all I possess would be yours." This condition of mind among those nearest Montezuma's city was hardly encouraging to Cortez. But Cortez was not the man to entertain one thought of doubt or fear. End of chapter 2.